Hello there, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Business. And today we are with Karen Meadows. I will let her introduce herself and tell us a little bit about her business. Over to you, Karen.
Okay, so I'm Karen Meadows and my business is Your Property Options, and it is for property investors and also for people who want to get into property and are not quite sure how, and I can help them, and people who have problems with their property. So there are all sorts of things that can happen to people when they've got property, and they can then come to me and talk about how they can get out of that problem. And I love challenges, so that's my thing, really. Thank you, Richard.
Okay, absolutely amazing. So I'm assuming because you've got a property investment business that you yourself invest in properties. So why did you get involved investing in property?
Okay, so my journey started because my husband actually said, well, why don't we get a property for your pension? I have a local authority pension, which isn't brilliant. I've had a number of different careers over the years. And so we started looking for a property that we could let out. And we bought a property in Kidderminster. I'm based in Evesham, so in the West Midlands, and Kidderminster's not that far away. We bought a property there and we have let that since. And that's that was the reason. It was for pension. And a lot of people do that because when they're retired, they can sort of sit back and the property's bringing them in a bit of an income each month. So that's helpful. Later on, I was actually diagnosed with MS. So for me, that means that sometimes I can't work as efficiently as I want to, and I can't do as much as I want to. So having property then gives me an income which helps to support that. So there's a number of reasons people go into property, but those are mine.
Okay, that sounds fantastic. So if somebody was looking at investing in property, what sort of options would there be to invest in property?
Okay, so there are a number of things, and it really depends on whether you want to be a landlord or not, and you can be an active landlord or a passive landlord, or whether you just want to get a better return on the investment that you've got, on the cash that you've got in the bank. So you don't have to buy property at all. You can just invest in property projects and get a good return on that. So if you want to buy property, you then have to decide why you're buying it and what you want to buy. So you can buy one that you will refurbish and sell it again or let it. You can buy one just like we did, which was we just wanted to let it out. You can buy a larger property, which you can then turn into a house of multiple occupation, which is where you let individual rooms. That's quite labour intensive. And there are all sorts of things you can do. It just depends really on what your long-term goals are. So you have to think about that first, start where your long-term goal is, and then work back and work out how you're going to get there. And by talking to people like me or any other investor, will probably help you along that way by giving you the information that you need. Okay.
Because I know from the conversations we've had about property investing and your business in general, I was quite surprised at how many different kinds of property investing there are, and how it can depend, obviously, if you have short-term goals, and as you told me before, whether you wanted to buy a house that needs refurbishing and then you refurbish it and then sell it for a profit that way, or whether you're looking for a longer-term goal of investing in it, like as you've done, for more of a returns-based thing over a long-term period. So that's something that for someone who hasn't, like me, who hasn't really thought of investing in property, was quite an eye-opening experience, because I didn't really understand a lot about property investing. Do you find that's quite common? Do people just not know about these kind of different types of property investing?
Yeah, I learned huge amounts. There was all sorts of things. Before I went on various training courses and before I met a lot of other investors, it was the only option really was let's rent, let's buy somewhere and rent it out. But there are all sorts of different strategies that you can use for property investment, and there are lots of books out there that you can buy or will be given away, by people that will tell you more about it. And if you go onto YouTube or again, talk to me, or talk to an independent financial advisor. They will give you advice on the sorts of things that will suit you, because everybody has a different financial situation. So talking to a financial advisor is something that's essential, and somebody who knows about property, because some people look at mortgages, some people look at property, some people look at all sorts of other things, other types of investments. So it's speaking to the right person. I'm not a financial advisor, so I will never give advice that anybody should follow, but I can tell you what I've done, and it works for me. So I have an advisor, and I always run my ideas past him first.
So that's a good thing to mention to the viewers also, that if you are looking at these kind of investments, it's good to seek the proper professional advice before you do so, to make sure that you're secure in your own finances. So while we're on the subject of finances, how much sort of would be a minimum you would need before you got to start thinking about whether you'd like to invest in property? So what sort of lump sum are you looking at money-wise?
Okay. So it does depend on what sort of project or what sort of property you're going to buy, what your long-term aim is for that property, and where in the country you're buying it. So if you're buying property in the north, it's going to be very much cheaper than here. Generally, the deposit that you need for property investment or a buy-to-let, for example, would be between 25 and 30%, which is much higher than if you're buying your own home. And it takes a bit of a hit. And we remortgaged our own house. We took equity out of our house for our first property that we bought. So that helped us along the way. But some people, if they're doing a refurbishment project, they may just borrow the money. And that can be from friends, from family, from close acquaintances, and some people, or they may have inherited money that they might use for that sort of thing. And then if you're refurbishing a property, so you might be using a bridging loan rather than a mortgage. And I didn't know anything about that. I only ever knew about mortgages. So there are things called bridging loans. So you borrow the money when a property generally isn't mortgageable. And there are certain things in a property or that a property might not have that mean you can't mortgage it. So if it hasn't got a kitchen, if it hasn't got a bathroom, if it's an old thing that needs a lot of work doing on it, you won't get a mortgage on it generally. So if you're borrowing the money for that, you will be paying an interest rate on that money that you borrow. So you can borrow from as I said, family and friends, and you agree a rate with them that they're happy with. And at the moment, the money in the bank is getting, I think I had a letter yesterday or the day before saying, we're really pleased to be telling you that an interest rate change is happening in January and you'll be getting 0%. So I was really happy to have that. Of course I wasn't, but I do invest in property as well. So I get a decent return on that, and it is much higher than 0%. So I'm happy, and those are generally short-term projects. So I think you have to be a little bit careful when you're doing that. But once you get into it and you're happy to do it, then lots of people do it. Lots of investors do that. So that's really good. So once you've got your own property, then you can over time remortgage that if it's on a mortgage, and then you can get some money back out of it, and then you can just start again. It's what a lot of people do, so you haven't got to find another big lump sum. It's there already. And we have one which this year we were supposed to remortgage it. It's been delayed a little bit, but we've had it 3 years, and we'll be taking 25-30 grand out. So we can then use that as a deposit on something else, which is really helpful.
Okay, so with that in bearing in mind, and like I said, so your property investment you are letting out, do you have to manage the tenants yourself, or is that something that you can outsource to, say, like a third party?
Yeah, there's lots of rental agents, and quite often you'll see them alongside estate agents, or estate agents will do rentals and sales, and you can use a rental agent. We did, when we, on our first property, we decided we didn't want to manage it. So we were paying, I think, 10% of the income of the rental to an agent, but that something happened and that went wrong. So actually I'm managing that property myself, and I have very good tenants, so it works, and it's a single let and it works. And quite a lot of people, if they've only got 1 or 2 properties, will manage them themselves. But you just have to think about how far that property is away from you. So if you live in the Midlands like we do, and you've got property in Manchester, you probably won't be managing it yourself, because if something goes wrong, you've got to drive up or get somebody to fix it or whatever. So it's more likely that you'll have an agent who will organise things. And there are different types of management and different levels of management. So they can do full management, where they organise any repairs, or they just collect the rent. You know, so it's up to you. And if you've got a house of multiple occupation, if you've got a house that's divided into rooms, that's much harder to manage by yourself, because you've got multiple tenants then who could be telling you about all sorts of different things at all sorts of times of the day or night. So you probably would choose a managing agent for them as well.
So I'm assuming these third-party agents would be taking a fee for these services, I assume, because obviously they're taking that.
Yeah, usually 10%-ish. You know, for a single let, 10 to 12 is about average here. And for an HMO, it's around 15%. So it's higher, but the income from an HMO or house of multiple occupation is much higher than a single let. So, you know, it doesn't matter that you pay a bit more in management, perhaps.
Yeah, that's not actually as bad as I was expecting. I was expecting them to take a lot more for actually like almost managing the entire like show sort of thing, you know, if they deal with everything. And then obviously just you have to sign everything off and then pay obviously any bills that need to be paid. And but it's actually, it sounds like quite a reasonable sort of sacrifice to make. If you, like you say, if you're in a different side of the country, it saves you having to drive or deal with it from there. So
and it depends on whether you want to be hands-on or hands-off. If you just want, you know, if you just want the income and you don't really want anything to do with it, there are some investors I know who have never seen the properties that they've bought. Never seen them. They've just bought them. Someone's managed that. Someone's managed getting the tenants in, and they manage it, you know, and they haven't, and they're not bothered really. And there are investors who are out of the country who have got investments in this country and never see it. So it depends on what how you feel about it and how many properties you have, of course.
Yeah, I never really thought about that. Like, if you were, say, buying a property abroad or something, and you would have to have that managed as something that would be very difficult to do yourself. So in regards to the deposit conversation, if we could go back a little bit, is that something you have to do on your own, or can you do it as like a group of people, or like a conglomerate of like friends that are looking into invest in properties themselves?
Yeah, yes, you can. Of course, you can do it by yourself, or you can have a group of friends. And if you've got a group of friends, you'll be dividing the returns up, and then you've got to decide amongst that group who is going to do what, who is going to be responsible for what, because there are, you know, who's going to contact the managing agent, who's the managing agent going to call if there's a problem, who's going to look after the finances. So there are various things. And of course, on the land register, you can only have a finite number of people on there. So I think it's 4. You can have a finite number of people on there. So if you've got more than 4 people, you need to be in a trust or a company or something else, so that you can get your name onto the land register. There are people that are companies. You know, I was speaking to 2 investors today who both had companies, but they were working together. They have quite a big pot to put into investment, so they've decided to work together. But I don't think I know of any groups of sort of 5 people that would get together to do a small project. I mean, bigger projects you may well, but then you may decide to form a company for that purpose. and that whether you're a company or whether you're a personal investor, makes a difference to your tax returns. And again, I am not a tax specialist, and there are all sorts of things, you have to think about. And my accountant says to me, every time you think of getting a property, come and see me, and I will think, I will look at the tax implications of that, because there are, there's capital gains tax you have to pay if you're improving a property and then you sell it later on, or if it over time it builds, and the value increases. So there's all of those sorts of things you have to consider. So you need to take advice. If you're thinking of buying more than one or whatever, then you need to take advice, because you need to understand, or have somebody, sitting by you who understands what the implications are in terms of tax, because it's not a tax-free investment, of course. And you just have to think carefully about it.
Yeah, so it just reiterates your point from earlier. It's about gaining that knowledge and seeking that specialist financial help when it comes into times for making that kind of leap of faith almost into the investing and into property world. So in your opinion, do you think it's better to do short-term investments or long-term investments? What are your opinions on both, really? Would you consider short-term better than long-term, or is like for you, because obviously you're planning for your retirement, is long-term investments the better option, and is it very personal, I suppose?
I think it depends on what your long-term goal is, and also on the amount of cash you have at the moment. So you might decide to start off with a flip, so that's a refurbishment and a sale, to make a chunk of cash that you can later use to buy something that you're going to keep for longer and hold for the long term. If you're renting a property, then you will get a small amount of cash each month from that rental, minus your mortgage, or minus your whatever it is you're paying, your insurances. And if you've got an HMO, then you're paying the bills as well. So you get a bigger income, but you've got a bigger chunk going out. But actually, overall, you should be getting a net net income that's higher than you would for a standard single let. I mean, for us, we like to hold on to property, have a bit of income now, but hold on to the lot for the long term, and we have a choice of selling it when we get older. If we have enough properties, we might not need to sell them, or leave them to our children. So that's another thing that people might do in the long term. They might think about leaving it to their children. But then you have to think about inheritance tax and all the rest of it. So you've got to think about. So when we had our wills written, we had a will writer, specialist will writer, not a solicitor, write our wills, and he wrote our properties into trust, which means it takes them out of the inheritance tax bracket. But again, you have to talk to somebody specialist, to find out, so they can find out what you've got or what you want to have, and then put a vehicle in place to manage that. So, and that's us. So the children will inherit them if they want to, or they can sell them if they want to, or whatever they want to do. And if we have enough properties, then we'll just live on the income, and that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah. So with regards, or almost like a follow-on question to that, are there any sort of like bad investments that you should try and avoid, or is there any like definite red flags that you should look out for? Because obviously, if you are new to being an investor, and obviously if you're deciding not to take the advice of someone like yourself, is there any kind of red flags that you should be looking for?
I think you have to just clearly understand the reason that you're doing it. That's one thing. I mean, over time, if you look at, there are graphs that show you the sort of the rise of house values over time, and they don't it's never gone down, which I don't know if that's right. It's always gone up. You know, and there are little blips, and you know, we had in 2008, I think, that the prices rose,
the recession,
hugely, a bit like, and then they dropped massively. But over time, generally, property prices increase. So if you're holding for the long term, it doesn't matter if it goes up and down a little bit. So there's not, in terms of red flags, there's not, you know, property is classed as one of the safest investment vehicles. I mean, I don't have money in shares particularly, but some people shares, and then there's Bitcoin and all of those things, which I don't understand and don't really want to get involved in. And people do make good money that way, but you've got to understand it. And property is much easier, in my opinion, to look at. And there's, you know, you can look at the Nationwide website has graphs that show you the values, which is good. I think you've just got to be clear. If you were buying a house to renovate and sell on, and you didn't renovate it the right way, or you didn't do the right works on it, the value may not be as high at the end as you'd expected, and therefore you might not make that chunk of cash that you want. If you've used a bridging loan, for example, and didn't really understand how bridging loans work and the fees work with that, you might find that the money you've made at the end is eaten up by the bridging loan fees. So you have to, at the beginning, you have to work out all of these things, look at stamp duty costs and solicitors' fees, other legal fees, and the costs of renovation, and know what the costs of renovation are. It's quite often more than a tin of paint from B&Q or whatever. So you just, and there are ways of buying products cheaper if you're a landlord. There are different groups that you can join, so you can get things at trade price. So that helps to bring your costs down. But I think you've just got to be educated a little bit, you know. And there are lots of people out there who haven't done education and have bought a property, and that over time they've renovated it or whatever, or they've lived in it and renovated it and sold it. And that's something that some people do. And that works. It can work very easily for them. But if they're just going in, you know, buying any old property, and they've got, you know, visions of, so perhaps they were buying a house and they were planning on turning it into a 4-bed or 5-bed HMO, house of multiple occupation, and then they find out that in the area they've bought it in, they're not allowed to have an HMO license, then that would be a waste of money for them, and they'd have to just then sell it on or rent it as a 3-bed, 4-bed house or whatever it was to start with. So it's just knowing what legislation goes with what type of property. So with single lets, for example, you have to have the electrics checked every 5 years now. So it's little bits like that you need to know. So you have to build that into your costs. And these are full wiring checks. It's not just a portable appliance check, and those you do on HMOs as well. But it's knowing all of these little things that you need to, and gas checks. You have to do a gas check every year if you've got a gas cooker. So maybe the answer is don't have a gas cooker, don't have a boiler. Some places don't have any gas in them, and you know, from a fire risk point of view, that's really good. People like gas, you know. One day we won't have it. So we'll have to think about other things.
The way that the world's going nowadays, I suppose, is that something that as a property investor yourself, is that something that you would potentially look at, maybe like solar panels and more the environmentally friendly way of doing things, and like replacing the boiler with these new energy electric ones rather than the gas-fired ones?
Yeah, there are. I mean, there's, as an investor, if you're renting a property, there's something called the EPC, which a lot of people know about, and it's the Energy Performance Certificate. So you can't sell a property or rent a property without an EPC, and it has to be above a certain level. It has to be above an E, and that's actually going up in the future. So you have to have a certain energy efficiency in that home. So you wouldn't want to necessarily rent a property that was had single glazing and no and it had damp and it didn't have any fibers, insulation and things like that. So you have to have a certain amount of things in there. And when you have your EPC check, they will give you a list of recommendations for improving it even further. And one of those is quite often solar panels. And I have friends who put solar panels on every house that they rent, but they're all HMOs. I don't know about people who would put them on single lets, but it's a cost. So if you're keeping something for a long time, you may decide that cost is worth it, and you've got to balance, your costs against your income versus the EPC rating that you need to have. So there's lots of things you've got to know about and think about. Yes, and I would like my house to be. I mean, I looked at ground source heat pumps for a property that I had, but it wasn't possible. It just wasn't possible where it was. You couldn't dig down. You couldn't dig, far enough back into the garden or whatever. There wasn't enough space. So it wasn't a thing to consider. And I'm having to change the boiler soon. And that would have worked, but it would have, if I could have done that, I would have done that.
Yeah.
But so I'm looking at other options.
Yeah. So I suppose it's like, as you said before, it's about the money availability that you have to put into this investment. It's not just about buying the property itself. It's about potentially upgrading it in different kinds of ways. So I suppose in the long term and short, all these questions are why your company exists, I suppose, because someone like me, it's like I would never even think of all these different kinds of options, all these different kinds of things you have to consider and check. And obviously, I should imagine the legislation is quite hefty on this sort of thing, so it's something that you have to consider. So I'd like to thank you very much for your time, and I'm sure the viewers will get a lot out of this little segment of Let's Talk Business. So if you'd like to say how viewers can contact you, and I will also leave all your details in the comments below. And how can people find out where you are?
Okay, so you have my web address, which is on there. So we have a contact form on that. I'm on LinkedIn, Karen Meadows. You can look me up there. I'm on Facebook and I'm on Twitter as well. I think we have an Instagram page, but it's not very used as yet. I'm just learning about that one. So there are lots of ways, but the website is the easiest address at the moment to contact me by.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Like as I said, all the Karen details will be in the description below. And I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thank you very much for watching.